Hey everyone, Margarita here again, and I'm going to film this episode today on how my life ended up in shambles past the point of no return. Now, you are going to have to view quite a few of my videos to fully understand the scope of everything I'm talking about and what has all been going on for decades. There is not a possible way to just film one or two or a few videos. There's no way to do just that, to explain to the world what has actually been going on. So where I'm going to start telling this part of my life, I'll go back about 10 years. But to fully understand everything, you'll just have to view the different videos that I've already released. And there will be some others in the future that go into depth about some of these matters. And you'll know based on the title of the video what each video is pertaining to, or what story, what section of my life, because there's just so many pieces and so many crimes for so many years. um, where I'm going to start telling this video is about 10 years ago. So even if I tried to start it from the very beginning, this video would be 2-3 hours long. So I'm just going to jump backwards about 10 years and kind of bring it to the current day, to get people to fully understand where I am today, how my life ended up in shambles, with me backed into a corner, past the point of no return, because it is all pertaining to the decades of ongoing crimes. And with that continuing on for so long and so many crimes piggybacking off the last batch, and that just going on for decades, it's led to the current day. So to fully understand prior to the 10 years ago, you'll just have to skim through the different playlists, the different videos, and then keep an eye out for future videos. As I'm telling everything, it will all come together in the end. And the way it's filmed on YouTube, or the way it's uploaded to YouTube with the different playlists, it's a little more easier to decipher what videos you want to watch, with the different labels in the playlist, because it's not like that on every platform. So, yes, view the other videos. It makes a lot more sense. Or if you view some of the last few videos that I posted prior to this, it would even make a lot more sense just viewing the past 2 to 5 videos. And it would give you a little bit of a fill in prior to the 10 years, to the 10 years ago to the current, and it'll make a lot more sense. So, I guess I can start with about 10 years ago, a little over 10 years ago, I guess you could say, was my mother's 2013 escapade. So I did a whole video on that already. You can view that one. I released that about a month or two ago. And that would help you fully understand what all happened from that day going forward, because that was an extreme disruption, where my life never got back in order due to that significant disruption. And again, these are all crimes. Everything I'm talking about, these are all crimes. My mother's at the root of all of them. All these high level officials and different agencies have helped her along the way. Different individuals, different agencies, a mix of them. And then it turns into other people, and it goes back to some of the same individuals who have already helped down the line. And this has just been ongoing for a very long time. So after the 2013 escapade happened, it really left everything past the point of no return from that day. And then I tried to pick up the pieces of everything, but it wasn't possible to get back to where I was just prior to that, because it took me a few years of building and working really hard at a rapid rate to get to the point where I was when that all occurred. I had spent decades, it was probably about 2 decades, working very hard, working harder than the average person, and double and triple time what a normal person would, because I was very high functioning before my injury. So even though my injury didn't happen until 2016 and 2018, where that second part in 2018 put me past the point of no return permanently for the rest of my life, um, it really started with the 2013 escapade, because it was not possible for me to get the pieces of my life back that were blown apart during that situation because of how fast I was working, how hard I was working, and the way the economy was at a dip when I started building to get to that point, the couple years prior to that, because this was after another restart that my mother had caused because she'd caused 3 complete wipeouts. So the 2013 escapade was the third wipeout. So prior to that, there was already a different wipeout, and I had already rebuilt from that one to 2013. So with the way the economy had dipped down and then started to go back up, I was already had supposed to purchase my next home with all cash. There wasn't supposed to be a mortgage. And I had the cash in hand. I was working very hard, had all the money, and had looked at 5 or 6 serious properties and just didn't make any moves. And looking back on it, I really should have just done that. It would have prevented a lot of the catastrophe that had happened. She wouldn't have been able to infiltrate to that degree. And then I hesitated on the move and I didn't make the move. Now, in reality, in a normal person's world, that wouldn't be a problem. There wouldn't be an issue. I didn't make a wrong decision. With the numerous personality disorders and mental disorders that my mother has and the ongoing decades of crimes, puts me in a predicament where I don't have room for error or room to hesitate on making any type of decisions, whether that be business wise or in my personal life, because it causes catastrophic outcomes due to all of those matters. So in a regular person's world, there would have been nothing wrong with me delaying making those decisions, which led to the catastrophe in 2013. So with the economy rising and the prices of houses going up, I couldn't work fast enough to get the money back in my pocket to make the next move as was already planned the few years prior to this. It wasn't possible to generate money that fast enough to get that much back. I had a lot. I had quite a bit of money in cash stacked up, and it just wasn't possible. Even if I had worked really hard for 2 years, it wouldn't have built back to where I was prior to that incident. So along the way, this happened many times along the way, even prior to 2013, where my mother's catastrophic events that she causes in my life, these crime escapades, it's just one small move. And with her running her mouth and gossiping over the phone with all these people, all these friends, family, neighbors, whoever she's talking to, police departments and court systems, whoever she's talking to, one small move from her blows everything apart with whatever she's stewing and brewing to do. She always has these plans that she waits for the perfect opportunity, one little opening, and she's in blowing it all apart. And she does it by continuing on with a false narrative in the background, which she's actually grown from the time I was a child. So none of this is normal whatsoever. There just wasn't a way for me to build back that fast from after the 2013 situation. I was literally in the best shape of my life. I was on top of the world. I had numerous businesses I was running. I was still 100% self-employed. I was taking my kids to school every day, picking them up every day, going to the gym 5-6 days a week. And I was literally on top of the world. And looking back on it, that is part of the problem because my mother is so jealous and envious. That was also a trigger that helped create that 2013 escapade situation. But I did try to continue to build where I had things prior to that after everything had settled down some months later. And I was only able to just generate money so fast. I mean, I was still doing it. I did move fairly quickly. I rebuilt to about half of where I was prior to that. And it did take me about 2.5 years, 2.5 years or 2.5 or 3.5 years. It took 3.5 years. So it, I don't know. It's kind of a sticky situation. Most people don't have to look at life in that manner. They don't have to perceive things the way I do. They're not forced to. People usually have comfortability. They're allowed to make their own life decisions without disruption. There's usually not high level officials and police officers and court systems chasing other people around, intervening in their lives and disrupting life plans and business plans and how things run in one's life. That's not normal. I'm aware of that. So yes, I did rebuild. The problem with all that, with buying the house and how I was doing things, the economy was also on the rise. At the same time, here I was trying to stack back up. With that time going by, also the real estate market was going up at the same time this was going on. And I was very well aware when I chose to make that decision to do what I did, to walk away from my second home and purchase that next one with cash shortly after. I had that all planned in advance prior to walking away from my second home, which I was upside down on the mortgage times four. And that was really the bank's fault. And it went on all over the country at that time period. So it wasn't just me, but I should have never been forced to buy that second home either. So with that happening and me already having this set in advance, when I was supposed to be purchasing my third home, which is the home I'm in now, and I didn't get till 2017. In 2013, the homes were still fairly cheap in price. I knew I only had a limited time period between 2011, and I didn't know exactly how much time I had, but I knew I had about 3 to 5 years from 2011 when I chose to go that route. And I was correct, because the house prices really started to rise during that time period very slowly, and then they spiked up a little higher and then a little higher, as the housing market is known to do. So with how I had things planned, it completely disrupted all of that. So it caused me to have to pay quite a bit more for the home that I should have already had in my possession, which then in turn turned into me having a small mortgage on the home versus having no mortgage. So that's due to the fallout of the 2013 escapade and my mother's crimes. So if you view my, like I said, view my last few videos, it'll make a lot more sense. You can't just come in here and watch like one video. It's really not going to make sense, because the crimes are so extravagant and it's so long term that it's going to be really hard for anybody to follow along with anything that I'm saying without watching numerous videos. So I guess it also depends on which order you watch them in. So, going into 2017, where I then had this home, so this was my third home. I had already given birth while suffering from carbon monoxide poisoning in 2016. I just didn't know what was wrong yet, because the hospital initially had covered it up. That actually had nothing to do with my mother. I made sure I went to into a hospital where she did not know where I was at or where the baby was going to be born, and it was not at a Beaumont facility, and I did that intentionally. There was numerous reasons why. That was one of them. So it actually had nothing to do with her, but ironically, I ended up going to work at a restaurant 30 weeks pregnant. And I was only supposed to be there about 15 hours a week, the last 10 weeks of pregnancy, which is what I was doing. And it was to supplement my income, but at no point, well, first of all, I wasn't planning on having more kids. Second of all, at no point should I have ever had to go work in that restaurant in the first place. But the reason I was there was due to my mother's escapade in 2013, the fallout from that, and then what all came out of that, and me being forced to work with my ex, my two younger kids' dad. His actions led to me needing to go work at a restaurant at 30 weeks pregnant, the last 10 weeks of pregnancy, when I was already way ahead of that cash wise, stacked up in my possession. Whether I had another baby or not, that should have never happened in the first place. It was literally him trying to get himself ahead and using what I had already worked for as a single individual to do that, because we were not together for all of those years. But it was my mother's escapade that forced us to be together. And then he took further actions that set me in a way deeper hole than I was already in. So me going to work at this restaurant is what caused the carbon monoxide poisoning. They had a ventilation system issue. They knew they had it. They were still trying to cover it up at this point. They had known for some years, I believe, now that I know what I know. And the restaurant was called Little Daddy's in Taylor, Michigan. It is now torn down, and there's a Chick-fil-A there. And there's a reason for that. But I should have never been in the building in the first place. So me being in there slowly caused some carbon monoxide poisoning, just that short period of time I was in there each week. And then I gave birth while suffering from it. And that also got covered up by that other hospital, which was Hutzel Women's Hospital. So coming out of it, we were both near death after the baby was born, and we both had brain injuries, and I couldn't communicate properly. I couldn't communicate what was wrong. because I had a brain injury during labor and delivery, and I lost the ability to communicate the last 3 to 4 hours. So I did videos on all of that already. It is on the carbon monoxide poisoning playlist. And coming out of that, because that happened, I never returned to normal. So I got in a deeper hole than what I was already in from the 2013 escapade. And because the hospital covered it up, and then they were attempting to make sure I didn't come out of that hospital alive and take my baby, we abruptly had to leave the next day. About 24 hours later, we left. And I was in fight or flight mode because of what was going on in that hospital. So no, I didn't know what was wrong. I was in such an extreme state of distress while having this brain injury for some time, and then went to an extreme state of relief. And then with the brain injury happening, I didn't have the words to communicate what was happening or what had happened. I didn't know because it was just so extreme. So you'll have to watch those videos to fully understand. But because it was such an extreme state of relief, I felt amazing for a minute. But then after I got home, I slowly went downhill that next day. And I went further and further downhill. I didn't know what was wrong for some time. I was never supposed to go back to that restaurant, and I did go back to being self-employed after the baby was born, but I didn't have full capacity. And I knew something was wrong. I kept having all these strange issues, and it wasn't one specific issue. It was just so many different strange things that don't point to anything specific. It's all really odd. And if you Google carbon monoxide poisoning, it'll tell you that as well. So I didn't figure this out for some time after I'm talking about this period of where this is all going on. So the carbon monoxide poisoning affected me to an extreme degree. It didn't break through my brain, but there was a brain injury from having lack of oxygen to the brain during labor and delivery. And then I was dealing with a baby who was suffering from the same thing. And we were both really miserable, not feeling good for some time. That actually went on for almost 5 years from that point. And with all that happening and me not knowing what was wrong, I just struggled through life. I took some more tasks off of my plate. I never made it back to the gym. I only went to the gym maybe 5 times from that day to this day. And it's been a few years since I even attempted this, but it's literally been about 5 times. So that was never able to be incorporated back into my life. But I later, 7 months later after that, returned back to that restaurant just for weekends, a couple days a week on the weekends only for a little over a year. And that's when I finally overloaded with the carbon monoxide. And that's when I figured out what had all been going on. It wasn't known until that point. So I was working backwards to figure it all out once it did happen. And it was never questionable. It all came out because I know there's people just talking shit, passing delusions amongst themselves about this or whatever they've been told. But the reality is, it was known all along. It was diagnosed right away. It was known all along. So if you got your information from my mother, those were all delusions she told you. Now, after all that happened, after I got poisoned, so by then it's 2018, we're already moved into the house I bought about 6 months prior. But I never made it back to being self-employed because I was self-employed after having the baby for about 7 months. Then I took a really bad fall because I was falling all over the place from the brain damage, and I was having extreme back pain, and I was losing functioning as time was going on, which is how I ended up back at the restaurant 7 months later. And then I worked a little over a year of those weekends, and that's when it all became known, and I was completely overloaded. By then, it was January 2018. But because I didn't know what happened initially with the baby, again, figuring this out backwards, I was already now I got 2 brain injuries by 2018, and then I was working backwards to figure it out after everything came out, and it went all the way back to the time I stepped foot in that building, where I should have never been because I was already way high up on the chain as a self-employed individual before that 2013 escapade. None of that should have ever happened. But I did get into the third house. I did continue on with my plans, and everything that kept getting disrupted along the way, it was still taking place. Everything was just very delayed. There was all these setbacks along the way due to the ongoing crimes and harassment. So, at that point, I didn't work for some time. I didn't work for about 5 months at all. And then when I did, I went down to Ohio. I went back to being self-employed, but that's when I went down to Ohio. I didn't go back to Detroit. and I was barely able to work. I barely did 1 or 2 nights a week. I couldn't do more than 4 hours. And I was barely getting there and back. I actually had to have somebody drive me for quite some time. I couldn't even get myself there. And I did, and then there was weeks I couldn't work at all. I just tried to target the highest amount of revenue nights, and I tried to go about it that way. And that's how I was able to keep things flowing and keep things paid while all this was going on, because it's my money that does all the building and the providing, and I had to make sure that I was trying to be okay on those 2 highest nights of the week. And then if I just couldn't do it, then I just wouldn't do it. But I would go in there and attempt to make as much as I could, because I make a lot of money in short periods of time if I'm able to get myself to that point where I can work. And it really at no time should I've ever been standing or trying to work. But I knew if I didn't do that, we weren't going to live. At that point, we were both near death. We stayed that way for about 3 years, and we just didn't go anywhere. We stayed completely homebound for, I believe it was like 2021. I mean, we went a couple places in 2020, maybe 2019, 2020, but not many. Like I'd say 2 to 4 places the entire time, all the way until like COVID was ending in 2021. So that's how we got to recover. But me going to work, it was very minimal. And then I was not under treatment yet. I didn't start treatment until 2019, March of 2019, and the baby started shortly after me. I had to kind of get myself ahead a couple months to get him started, to be able to come up with the money and maintain getting to the money, because I was suffering 50, 60 severe symptoms at once. I was literally laying at home the entire time doing nothing until it was time to go work that 1 4 hour shift, or that second 4 hour shift that weekend. That's what I was literally laying here doing nothing. I did no household chores for about 4 or 5 years. My kids had to do them, and then I had somebody working for me for a while as well. And I literally couldn't do any cleaning or have any chemicals or do any tasks. And I laid here while the world went on around me. I had to lay here and do nothing. And then COVID happened, so that tied right into what I was already experiencing, and the rest of the world got dropped down to my level and had to experience this with me. So when it came time to go back to work after COVID is when I had finally crossed that first threshold of well over 100 grand in out of pocket treatments. At that point, we had to go every day. It was about 2.5 years we went every day. And that was where I finally had some type of flow to being able to work what little bit I was. But I definitely couldn't do more than 2 to 3 nights per week. I still had to make sure I wasn't doing too much else the rest of that time. And and then I would basically try to target the 2 to 3 biggest money nights. Prior to all that, I couldn't do more than 1 to 2, and not more than 4 to 5 hours. And then after the 100,000 plus in treatments that I went through out of pocket, plus what my insurance spent, then I was able to try to do 2 to 3 nights, and I couldn't do more than maybe 6 hours or so, seven tops, I think, after that. But I couldn't do anything like that prior. I literally just struggled through the whole thing until COVID hit, and that was where I got paid for a year and a half to just actually recover, and then I kept treating. So that's where the change all happened in those few years, right after we had moved into this house. And we got moved in, didn't finish remodeling hardly anything. And then I was just laid out for several years before we were able to pick that back up about 3 years later. And so we did end up remodeling the house starting in the end of 2020, beginning of 2021. However, I was very limited because I was so sick. I could barely do anything, and I couldn't really stand for very long prior to Thanksgiving of 2020 because my brain was sagging in the back. So all of the effects of all of these issues, this is a very extreme injury. This is an inpatient injury that was being treated on an outpatient basis. And maybe from like 2021 on, you could have considered something like this an outpatient basis. But not if there's spills outside, like what's been going on for the past few years. All these large spills have been happening, and then the particle levels outside is really high. That's a problem. But if that wasn't going on, it would have been fine to treat it as an outpatient situation, from that point to this point. But for those first few years, it was definitely an inpatient situation. And I was in extreme distress while the people around me were screaming and acting like that's not what was going on. And here was my mother pumping everybody up around me full of delusions. Even though she's not allowed at my house, not coming to my house, she's having my dad take my older kids to her house, and she's repeating delusions to all of them. And that's what's been going on all of these years. It took my injury to figure out that's what's actually been going on. So not only did my mom prevent treatment within Beaumont Medical System once I became injured in 2018, and she had some false information and used other employees to enter it into my medical file, she was pumping up the people around me full of delusions to believe I was never injured in the first place. So when I was suffering in that manner, my brain was still sagging and I couldn't have sound, and there's just knots of carbon monoxide loaded into my brain and flowing through my whole system. All these people around me in my household were screaming, and here I couldn't get treatment at a hospital. I could barely get through each day from room to room in my house. I was barely standing up. Most of that time I spent laying down. And I just knew I had to keep going to treatment every day because I could feel everything reversing and clearing, and I could feel exactly what cleared each day, each time. It was usually several days, like they clear in cycles, kind of. Everything clears in cycles when you have an extreme poisoning to that degree where it's complete systemic poisoning. And so I felt it happening. I knew that's what I needed to do, and I just kept doing it until I got to a place where I was a little more functional as long as I maintained treatment. I wasn't just laying here doing nothing. I could at least attempt to do some of the remodeling and some of the other things going on at that point, because then I was on a 3-year pause with working on my house that I had bought when it was supposed to be continuously worked on from the time I bought it. So I just lost 3 years of, see, the house would have already been done had that not have happened. But then it did get done in about 2021-ish. It was almost done. And my mother's escapades continued on, and it turned into there being Ford's gas leak in 2021 and her making sure Ford cut my hotel off once that all happened. I was still very fragile. My brain tissue was still open. I was still supposed to be in a pretty much sterile environment. I know you can't 100% be, but for what it was, my home was my sterile environment for all that time. There wasn't any gases or chemicals or toxins in here at that whole time, until the Ford gas leak happened. But my mother was able to convince the city and the people at Ford that I was never injured. There is no injury. There's no problem. I'm making it all up. I have this drug problem, this mental disorder, and nothing happened to my son and I. So immediately they cut off our hotel, based on whatever she told them. And I couldn't produce medical documents because I couldn't even travel through where everything had spilled. I couldn't even get to that doctor's office, and I was new to their office. They didn't see what I actually went through. I'd only been there about 6 months. And then the facility was the Oxford facility where I was treating. Well, they also weren't handing out medical records. Now that it's public and things have come out about some of the things going on over there, they weren't allowing me to take my medical records to give them to the city and to give it to Ford. And I knew I was going to die if they didn't produce the records, because our brains were bleeding. This gas was loading up in our entire system. It was flowing up and down our arms, taking over our systems, just brain bleeding and inner ear itching really bad because it was the blood slowly dripping out. We had to do a whole bunch of ear candles to get the situation under control. That's the state we were living in, but I couldn't get from, because we were away from the home. I was further south. I was in Ohio by this time. Couldn't get from there to Troy, Michigan. So that would be like an hour and a half north. I would have had to drive straight through the entire spill. I wasn't able to do any of that. I couldn't be in the area. I could only be in the area X amount of time, and I'd have to remove myself because the levels were so high for about six to 8 months, I'd say. Afterwards, it was really bad. And I had no choice but to leave and buy my house in Ohio because we were living on the floor in the home on the clearest room. The main level had the clearest room. So we were on the floor of that room where it was the clearest down low and a little higher up. And we lived that way until we got ourselves out of here, when I bought my house in Ohio. But it took about 9 months to come up with the money. And then we had to treat during that time as well. We just didn't go anywhere. And I only left to go to work. and I would leave and take us to treatment once a week. I would treat twice, he would treat once. And then the lady who worked for me, she continued to work for me for about 1.5 to 2 years. And so she would just come to my house after her regular job and watch my son. And I would go to work and she would watch him while I'd do the extra day of treatment. So that's how I ran things. That's how I kept it all going. But it was my mother's escapades in the background that were creating problems each step of the way. It turned into a catastrophic event. Once we were forced home, I knew there was a good chance we weren't even going to make it out of here. We had to do hundreds of ear candles. One of them ended up exploding in my ear due to the high levels of gas it was sucking out of my brain. That was how we were removing what was loading up as we were breathing it in. So that is not a problem for the general public. That is not anything the general public ever has to worry about or deal with in that type of manner. We're literally a one case ever type situation where the situation is that bad with somebody's blood-brain barrier being open. So it was that gas leak and my mother's crimes during it that forced me to buy the house in Ohio. But what would have happened is I would have eventually, either that following year after I bought the house in Ohio or that year that I bought the house in Ohio, if that had not all happened, I would have been ready to buy the next house during that time frame. And the house I'm currently in would have been an Airbnb. So we're talking back in like this would have been 2022-ish to 2023 that would have happened. And that's also when I was trying to get my dad to retire to come work with me. And I said, you don't need to work anymore. You already get Social Security. And you don't have to punch a clock anymore. Like you've worked long enough. You can work with me and I'll just work. I knew I only needed to work 1 or 2 more years in order to get things back in order. So I would have just where I offered it to him. I said, I'll work 1 or 2 more years and then you can retire. You can retire now. And I'll go buy the next house, in a few months and then you can work whenever you want. And he didn't believe that I could really pay him or pull this off when it totally adds up with the amount of money that would have been generated in that situation would have been enough to cover everything and both of our payments as long as I spent another year or two working first. And he thought it was a joke. And I think he even mentioned something to my mom and she probably laughed. And so he didn't take the offer, but due to that, that's why I went to Ohio anyways. And if he would have agreed, I wouldn't have had to put a tenant in the house. So I did put the tenant in the house. She knew in advance I was going to be gone 1 to 2 years, that she had a 2-year maximum time limit in the house. And everything was almost done being remodeled. They stayed in it for 12 months flat and did over 100 grand in damage, much of which was water damage. And then she did not tell me. I found it about 2 months later. So that created over $100,000 in damage. I did get moved back into the house. So about 18 months later, I was gone 18 months. And it created a bunch of problems because then I had to restart, redo all the work we already did, get it more restored to where it was. Even though it's nicer now, it wouldn't have mattered. It was adequate before. The house was still adequate to generate money. It didn't need to be fully upgraded all at one time. It still would have been better off doing things the way I had them set to be. But if the gas situation did not happen, or if my dad had agreed at the time I was offering him to do this would have worked out either one of those ways. So really what should have happened also, if the Ford gas still would have spilled, the Ford Motor Company would have continued to either pay for my hotel or they would have probably bought the home that I ended up buying because it would have been cheaper. So I don't know. We'll never know. Those are the possibilities that could have happened. Or if my life wasn't disrupted, that's what one of those options would have happened. So my life has ended up in shambles because when that 100 grand in damage happened and she hid the situation and then didn't pay the rent for like whatever, she owed a little bit of rent, and she would have between all of that, it would have changed everything because she also threw away the first 2 insurance checks because she was mad she was getting evicted for the damage. Now, nobody was ever supposed to be in the basement. They were technically only renting out 2/3 of my home. and all my stuff was in the basement and nobody was ever supposed to be down there. And she freely let her kids play down there and they ruined some things and it caused the damage to be worse. And they ruined all of my stuff. The rest of my stuff was at my house in Ohio and I did get to keep like half of my stuff. But I can't get any of that back, and all of that damage is what I'm still currently finishing up. Either way, there should have never been a tenant put in the home. That was 100% my mother's criminal actions and her malicious, manipulative behavior behind the scenes and her repeating delusions to my dad and other individuals. That's what the problem is. That's exactly what happened, because either way you look at it, the only reason Ford cut my hotel off is because of what she told them. She inserted herself when the situation happened, called to the city in the top of Ford, watching from the news, getting the phone number from the news. I saw her. I was at their house briefly, and that was the day she attempted to murder me. Then she got away with it. So that's what's all gone on. None of these things should have ever occurred. At the root of each situation that gets worse, it's my mother's actions, because now she destroyed everything I was building in 2013. I end up in a different situation where I'm starting to rebuild, but then another significant thing happens, and she didn't know I was injured until 2018. So it took a couple of years for her to even find that out. But it all ties right in, because once she found out I was injured, she made sure I didn't receive treatment within the medical system. She helped those people. She gave them false information to put in my medical charts. And so they still operate on all that to this day. There's still ongoing problems with that to this day. We can't get help at local hospitals. It's a huge mess. 9 times out of 10, I get kicked out as a patient or a visitor due to whatever she's been telling these hospitals about me, because it's also all the hospitals my dad's ever been at as well. And he's been at numerous since his injury 2.5 years ago. So this has all led to the current day. Each step of the way, there's a new set of problems that get added to the bucket, the train of problems that's already running, and picks up more as it's going down. And so that's how I ended up backed into this corner, being forced to retire for the most part, other than working on the house in order to get everything back in order. I got the house back 18 months ago from today. So I've had it back for 18 months and I've been working on it the entire time. And because I'm permanently injured and I have limited functioning, and I'm not treating as much right this second, I had to take a break because I couldn't get other things done. I was spending over half my day treating us. So I had to take a break from that so I could get other things done. And it's causing all these problems because I still have more on my plate than I can handle, and I'm permanently injured while my mother's in the background playing games. And this has been going on my entire injury since 2018 to that extreme degree, because then she was manipulating people in the mix a few years ago as well. Still is today, but it turned into a giant mess. And then she ended up making sure my daughter was kidnapped at the end of 2021 during the gas leak. That's a whole other issue. And so that led to ongoing issues for years. And Brownstown police has participated in the crimes of all that and not returning her. She stayed truant from school for a year and a half at my house in my school district in Gibraltar, because we're the Gibraltar School District, even though we live in Flat Rock, Michigan. So all of these things happened during this. She inserted herself at different points from that initial escapade from 2013. And I'm not saying she didn't do other escapades prior. She did. I'm just saying that was a significant restart with where she did all that, and I had to restart again. So yeah, it was just this train of things that got added to it. And with the injury being so long term and so severe, I was literally incapacitated for about 3.5 years. So for that to be my situation, there was no way out of it. I had to lay there and try to let my brain heal and do nothing but treatment and back all that time, or I knew I wasn't going to be okay. And prior to finding treatment, I knew if I didn't find it, we weren't going to live. And that was back in 2018, end of 2018 to 2019. So really coming out of COVID is where we were starting to have some normalized lives. And that was also, my son was about to start kindergarten when the gas leak happened. And so I was already glad I had him set up for homeschool because of our situation, and we ended up having to leave the area for some time initially anyway. So it worked out, and that's how it's going to have to stay for him. That's how things work, because I have to be able to manage our injury and how injured I got and never got to recover. I'm chronically sick. My system is poisoned. My cells are poisoned. I live feeling like I have the flu all the time. like at a cellular level that makes you feel weak and sick. I live that way. And then on clearer days, if I treat enough or I can remove enough cycles, then it's not as bad. But that's what happened to me initially, and the majority of it goes through my open brain tissue. So I live that way. I accommodate our symptoms, and then I accommodate my mother's ongoing chaos and crimes and harassment and all these people she's using to help. But all along the way, there's all these issues. There's all these different issues she's inserting herself in and causing more problems. And she's trying to make me look unstable to support the false narrative she's been telling people for all these decades. And no one knew anything about me because I kept my entire life private. Well, now I'm telling the world everything so everybody knows the truth about what was actually going on. It's not normal for somebody to insert themselves in their adult child's life when there's no relationship, no contact, it hasn't been all these decades, and to cause all these problems and make people believe that she's a part of my life or knows something about me when none of that's real in the first place. So that's what has caused every step of the way. Each person and agency she calls along the way and says stuff about me, they believe her just by her saying she's my mother. And that's what's gone on with her entire family and all her friends and whoever she's been telling all this time. That's what's been going on. But it's caused my life to be in shambles. I'm chronically sick, permanently injured for the rest of my life over the poisoning. I've now had a total of 5 brain injuries. I'm injured for the rest of my life. I'm going to be living a modified life the rest of my life. Although we do go some places now, there's still periods where we don't, and it's fine. I'm fine with that. But at least we're not in extreme state of distress. And financially, I can't pick up the pieces and move forward properly until the entire insurance claim is situated and the house is put back together. So that backs me into a corner of having to take care of all that while filming the videos, while trying to expose my mother and all of these people for what they've been doing and all the crimes they've committed. Because at the root, they've been doing this to gain access to a trust fund that was left for me when I was a small child. So that's the reason for the decades of escapades. That reason was not known for some time. And once the pieces all came together, then we kind of look back over time like, okay, yeah, this happened then and this happened over here. The puzzle is put together. That is what's going on here. The fact that this was so organized and so extreme, the harassment and the degree of harassment and how my mother goes about all this and all these using all these agencies and people, it's so extreme that eventually, once that's going on for some decades, you're beginning to wonder why that would be going on. At the same time, I do remember bits and pieces of being at the funeral and being at the reading of the will and going there after the funeral. I do remember being there myself. So all the pieces came together. That's what's been going on, and really, it's her own behavior that took it to that degree to get figured out, because she went so crazy, so heavy, so hard with this false narrative, with these delusions and this whole storyline for decades, and none of it's real. Like, the whole thing is absurd. She's blown my life into pieces so many times and then turned my older kids against me. That's exactly why the younger one is not allowed to have a relationship with her. All she does is repeat delusions. She's been doing it since they were little kids. I just did not realize it until several years ago. So that's another issue. Everything, every little step of the way creates another problem. But with me being injured, the house has to be back in order, which it almost is. But that's what has to happen for me to start generating money properly the way I have all these years. I have to get that all back. And it was already put together a few years ago. It was already ready to go. So that's the issue, on top of me already losing the 3 years where it would have been worked on prior. So I lost numerous sets of years on this house. That's insane. That's not normal. But it is almost put back together and it is all upgraded. But I only have so much functioning and I have these other things I have to attend to. So I'm never gonna, my money's not gonna flow properly until that's all in order. But it's at the root, all these ongoing crimes and escapades. Hopefully everything just kind of clicks at the right spot where it's supposed to. When I get done with everything, I'm hoping everything just lines up. Because that's my best bet. There's really no reason to go about it any other way with where I'm at with everything. But I know I operate my life differently than everybody else. And the way I think and the way I operate is totally unique, and I guarantee most people do not think like me or see things how I view them. And there's it's for numerous reasons, but I can do a whole episode on that because I view how things work in the world differently and how to generate money differently than the average person. So I'll do a separate episode on all that. I just wanted to talk about how I got dug up into this hole past the point of no return. But at the end of the day, yeah, I'm under Chapter 13 bankruptcy, and the house payment will revert back to the normal payment in 3 years. So it's already been being paid on for almost 2 years, and there's no other way around it because there's so much equity in the home that there wouldn't be a reason to like just walk away. You would sell it at least. But the house has to be put back together no matter how you're looking at things. So that's what needs to happen. There wouldn't be no reason to do it otherwise because there's quite a bit of equity, and everything would be in the positive at the end of the day. So it all just kind of needs to line up and flow with the time frame I have and with the products I have to work on, what I do have with what's going to come next. Hopefully it all just flows properly. And who knows, maybe some of these videos will go viral, or my mother will do something stupid and get herself arrested and telling herself with her strange behavior. There's got to be people noticing at this point. There's no way there's not. But yeah, that's kind of where I'm at with things. Wanted to give a rundown of how I got to this dumb place in life and how all these crimes have affected me, all these long-term escapades. And then because it was just so heavy, I eventually figured out what was going on because none of this has been normal at any point during this. That's why I brought Charmaine in 5.5 years ago when I noticed it. There was something very wrong. Once I got injured, it was very extreme. And then I had to figure out why. So that's why I brought her in. I had her just keep watching because I went through a whole bunch of escapades with my mother prior, and then it got even more significant after I was injured. So that was another reason she was needed. That, and I was super injured, not knowing if I was going to live, and the people around me didn't know. They weren't comprehending like how serious I was injured or what was actually going on, and that my brain was burnt. There's numerous inches of space between my brain and my skull, and I'm like all fucked up, and they were acting like that's not what was going on in the beginning, maybe, but then as they were getting manipulated and repeated delusions to, their behavior slowly changed over the course of that time. So that's where things all went wrong with that. But it all ties together in the current day with no one really being on my team and just my younger one being on my team. And then that's why his name's on half the house. And it's just going to stay that way because it's obviously if no one's going to help me and he's here, not by choice, but he's here, you know. So if we just work together, that's how it's going to have to stay going forward as long as we own this house. But the plan was to have it as an Airbnb like 4 years ago, 3 or 4 years ago. Yeah, like 3 years ago. So if the gas leak hadn't happened, if my mom's crimes hadn't just continued on, living with brain bleeding and the way we had to live during that on the floor during that time, we didn't have a choice but to leave. It was terrible. There's nothing like it, and you can't stop it. And you can't get rid of it. You can't breathe the air anywhere in a 50-mile radius. At that point, it was a 50-mile radius. It slowly dwindled down to the 20-mile radius mark about 6 months later, but it was really bad for some time. But the rest of the public doesn't know that. There's a whole bunch of corruption on that. I'll release the whole series on that as well down the line. I think I might have already released a couple videos regarding that first one. But I will be back with more. I just wanted to talk about what's all been going on and how I got to this point. And it's just, it did get past the point of no return. There's nothing I can do about it except for to keep digging my way up out of the hole. And continue on with how I had things planned initially. So yeah, that's where I'm at with it. I'm just kind of on a time limit and I'm hoping everything connects and clicks. I'll be back with more. Thanks. Bye.